ードどうかした？
It seems like we're living in the age of censorship, and with every big win, there's a minor loss. And of course, if you saw the swimsuit trailer for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, everyone was talking about Tifa and just her overall look being a stark contrast from what we've seen in the first Final Fantasy VII remake, where we had an ethics department within Square Enix restricting and binding the chest of Tifa. And a lot of fans complain about that situation, and we're getting the opposite in the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and everyone celebrated that with much fanfare. It got over 11 million views, the trailer, within a few days, and that's what was so exciting to the fan base, to actually get the version of Tifa they imagined when the original Final Fantasy VII game came out. But now we're getting a little bit of censorship, and I wouldn't call it a big loss, but it is a minor loss in the case that they went back to the Final Fantasy VII remake, that original game that came out over 4 years ago, and did a little bit of censorship to that. And I think that was the biggest frustration for people. Even though the things that they did weren't that big of a deal, people didn't really care about it, it's the fact that they went in the past and gave an 8 GB update to that game and added a piece of censorship and nothing else. And that was the frustrating thing, where people are like, you're going back in time to add censorship to things that people would even notice. Of course people are going to complain about it. Me personally, I didn't really care about the censorship they added. I understand their point of view, where they're coming from. Maybe a lot of people complain, whether it's people that are progressive, social, political, or whether it's the Christian that have a problem with these sort of things when it comes to underage women. I can see the dichotomy there, and we're kind of having that dual censorship strategy coming from who were usually the more liberal side, the social democratic liberal progressives. They will be all in favor of just all the liberation of the female body and stuff like that, and usually had the Christian conservatives that were more restrictive in how the looks of girls look, specifically younger girls. And that's why we had many complaints about the Netflix movie Cuties, where we had underage girls a lot younger than the Tifa in this scene. But still, I can see the dichotomy there, where we have two censorship ideologies now instead of just one, which was usually conservative. Now we have the woke social progressive, where you only can censor things that are beautiful. You can uncensor anything that is ugly and distasteful. And I think that is the dichotomy we have here, where we have a dual censorship process now that is probably utterly confusing to the Japanese studios, where they just have a similar sense of moral understanding of what they're doing with their video games, where in America is just a dual sense of understanding of what needs to be censored and what needs to be uncensored. Of course, you have Mortal Kombat, where they're censoring women's bodies while decapitating them and pushing their skull in with their fists. You have this ideology that is so confusing to the Eastern developers, and I have to say this is part of that, where we're censoring Tifa here and we're uncensoring her in different parts of the game. But for me, this wasn't a big of a problem. The biggest problem is that they're going into these digital games and erasing different parts of the game and adding their different censorships to those games that you already purchased. And I think that is the main thing that is frustrating the fan base. I know people are going to say, who cares, Tifa? She was underage. Yeah, I understand that is a point you can bring up. But I think the bigger problem is them going back in time and censoring things that weren't a problem for the majority of the audience. No one really cared about it. No one complained about it. No one even mentioned this. And it seems like they did this based on their own personal convictions or influences, maybe within different studios, maybe the progressive social ethics departments that are part of westernized studios that are distributing this game, or maybe it was a reaction to a specific Christian conservative group that had a bad experience seeing this game. This could come from any sort of source, and that's where I'm thinking, like, must be a confusing time for Eastern developer dealing with the localizers in America who are excessively sensitive towards anything now. And I think their moral standards are all over the place, and it's hard to actually produce a game that is functional and can please everyone, because everyone has such a restrictive personality on what should be in a game and what shouldn't be in a game. And I think that dual censorship strategy in America, that it may be expanding depending on whatever belief system you hold, is the major problem for Eastern developers right now. And of course, you have these ESG, these investment bank diversity equity standards that are pushing you as well, that may be similar to some of the social progressive standards that you have to adhere to when you're trying to translate something to localizers. It's such a convoluted process that I can't really blame the Eastern developers that are trying to adjust something that is usually purely Japanese into a market so political as the westernized market has become in the recent years. And even though this has been going on for a few decades, it has gotten entirely worse this past 5 years when it came to at least the social progressive standards. And I think this censorship is showing that duality here, where we just cheered for them actually having a feminine woman actually be dressed in a feminine way and present herself that way. Everyone was cheering for that, and now we kind of have this strange censorship move that just came out of nowhere, where people wouldn't have cared if this was covered up even before the censorship. If this was covered up, and no one would even make a complaint if this was already in the game. No one would say anything. People would think it was strange if they uncovered it. People were like, why are you uncovering it? Who cares? I think that is the main thing people have to understand. It doesn't matter what they covered and what they did not cover. It's that the fact that they went back in time and changed something so small because of some sort of innocuous moral standard that they're trying to hold. And I think that is the main thing that is frustrating people. No one really cares if they covered it or not covered her. I think that's the main thing people are frustrated with, that they went back and changed something, and something that no one was complaining about. And I think that is the thing that is getting the fan base very angry with this censorship in and of itself. I don't think people really care if they covered a young Tifa up. If it was originally like this, like the image where she has a black tank top underneath, people wouldn't have cared. No one would say, oh, they censored her. But no, people would say, oh, she's a little girl. It would be natural for her to have something covering up. So I think people are not complaining about that. They're complaining the fact that they actually went back in time 4 years to the remake and adjusted it. And of course, I think this is a different thing than actual censorship. I think this is the George Lucasification of digital video games. If you don't know what George Lucas did with some of the Star Wars movies that came out in the 1990s, he went back in time and changed the digital effects, some scenes. He did an obvious remake within the old version of the Star Wars movies, and I think people who were frustrated with that because they like the original Star Wars. And I think now we have this in the digital video game space where people can do George Lucas moves, where they can go back into the past and change things in the original games. And I think that is something people will always be frustrated with, and I'm going to do a video based on the George Lucasification of digital video games, where some of these developers are going to go back in the past and maybe censor things and maybe change entire story arcs. And I think we saw that kind of with Last of Us 2, where they changed the entire story with Joel and the doctor so they can make Joel look like an evil mass murderer. But that wasn't the case when you played the original game. It was reasonable for Joel to actually go after the fireflies and the doctors. And I think this is a step ahead of that, where we're just going back in time and just changing things here or there, where the game is just not as similar. And I think this is more of a directorial problem right now, and instead of a censorship problem. And I think that is going to grow in the digital space of video games. But you tell me what you think about the situation. Leave your comments. Do you think this is a case of censorship or the George Lucasification of digital video games and media? You leave your comments. Tell me what you think about the situation. Like, share, and subscribe. This is Wagner Knows Why. Catch you next time.